Courage. Courage. This is the type of thing that I really enjoy. So 12 books, 12 months, 12 favorites. Woo! And then other months where it was like, woo! Hello lovely bookworms, I'm Esmay from Paradise of Pages on Instagram and also on Twitter, and welcome to a new video. It's the first video of the year. I want to wish you all a happy new year. I hope you've had a better 2021 than I did. In any case, I hope 2022 will bring us lots of cheer, lots of fun, and I thought I could start the year off positively. And so I actually thought of something that is close to sort of an end of the year video, but not completely. And I thought I would do my favorites from each month. So for every month of the year 2021, I am going to be picking a favorite. So I have one favorite for January, one favorite for February, etc, etc. So 12 books, 12 months, 12 favorites. And some months were really difficult to pick because I had certain months where I had 4 to 5 5-star reads. So these are definitely, certain months are definitely top of the top, best of the best. With other months, really difficult to pick. So we shall see how this goes, especially during months that I have reading slumps. That was very difficult. But I have nonetheless found 12 books. So without further ado, let's get into it. I do have my trusty phone here with my list, and we are starting in January, and I think this might actually be one of the first books I have read this year or last year, and that is Force of Souls by Lori M. Lee. This follows a girl whose powers have been suppressed, but at some point it gets released. Released doesn't sound well, but the trance on her magic gets broken, and she then figures out who she truly is. She's bound to her friend as well, and what I loved about this is the atmosphere. This is such a dark yet interesting story, and I feel like it is also very renewing because it is not focused on romance. There's barely any in it. If there is, there's like hints of it, and for once I don't mind that. I'm usually the type of person that will need romance in books. I think it makes it better, in my opinion. And in general, this was just such a renewing story, and I've yet to read the sequel, which I hope to do this year. It is absolutely brilliant, and I cannot wait to see what will happen next. So that was January's pick. For February, I completely polar opposites. I read one of the Married with Magic books, and that is Duel with the Elf King. I think I've mentioned this before. This is, I think, one of the first, I would call it fantasy dark romance kind of thing. I am obsessed with it, and I really want to read a lot more of these. This is the type of thing that I really enjoy, and I think it is only fair to say that this story was brilliantly done. It's a standalone. This entire series by Elise Kova will focus on multiple stories. So it is a series, but it is a series of standalones, if that makes sense. With A Duel with the Elf King, our main protagonist is actually supposed to marry the Elf King, but they have suppressed her magic and they have suppressed who she really is, and so at one point the Elf King actually comes back to the human world to claim his bride, and then it becomes clear that she is actually his bride. She didn't know that, and then she is dragged off to Fairyland or Feyland, I'm not sure what they call it, and the way in which their relationship grew and the way in which this story was built was very interesting. It's definitely romance heavy, so if you don't like romance in fantasy or fantasy in romance, I think it's more like that, this is not a book for you. But if you like sort of the darker sort of fantasy romance, this is definitely for you. If not, stick to Forest of Souls. That one's really beautiful as well. But for February, I've picked that one. March was honestly a no-brainer. In March, I finally plucked up all of the courage. In March, I plucked up the courage to finally read this book. I've listened to most of the audiobook, and I've since really wanted to reread it, so I might not, but I might do that in 2022. And that is Refree the Stars by Hafsa Faizal. This is the continuation of We Hunt the Flame. And as you probably know, this is one of my absolute favorite duologies. It is desert vibe, so that says enough. It usually says enough. But this, at least the first book, We Hunt the Flame, follows Saphira and Nazir, and both of them are on a quest. Saphira actually goes on a quest to save the world, and Nazir is actually sent out to kill her. So that's really interesting. Nazir is literally the Prince of Death, and I'm so in love with them. One of my absolute favorites ever. I love this story. I really want to reread it, and I mean, if you want to buddy read this with me, let me know. It gives me a reason to reread it. So that is this duology. So April was a bit more difficult to pick because April wasn't my best reading month. It also didn't have the most amazing books. But I think it is fair to put this book on the list because it is a series that I absolutely adore. It is so cute and so well done. And that is A Tangle of Spells by Michelle Harrison. This is the third book in the A Pinch of Magic series, because the fourth book is coming out this year. And this is once again following the Widdowson sisters. I won't say too much about this one considering it's the third book, so we are a lot further from book one. But basically the premise of the entire series is that the Widdowson sisters are cursed and they cannot leave their hometown, because if they do, disaster strikes. This is the continuation of this series, is the third one, and I just love the adventure that this series has. The first, second, third, all of them were delightful. I love reading it. I am absolutely obsessed with it. I think I was gifted this, I was gifted this one by Femke, and honestly I want to reread them. But it's such a fun series, and I think if you love middle grade with a little bit of adventure and just sisterly love, this is the one for you. Do start with the first book though. Definitely a good idea to start with the first book. Similarly to April, May was difficult. I struggled finding a book and eventually went for one that is not 5 stars, but it is my favorite of that month. It is my favorite book of that month, and that is The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. This is the very first book in the Poirot series. I don't know if I can show you. Does it focus? Will it focus? I don't know if you can see this text, but these are all of the Agatha Christie Poirot works. We're not even talking about Marple or any other stories. But this one was very interesting. I, in general, love Poirot. He is such a fun little detective, this little Belgian who gets angry if you call him French, and I don't know, I just really picture David Sujet from the Agatha Christie's Poirot series, and I don't know, it's just such a fun story. They're delightful to read. They're not that big and they're always very intuitive and inventive, and I just want to own the entire series of this. I have quite a few already. I've been collecting them like crazy, and I just want one shelf that's just completely Poirot. I don't know, I just really love that. So that was my pick for May. Speaking of incredibly difficult, June. I think I read a total of like 3 books, 2 of them being dislikes and 1 of them being a reread. So I decided to go for the reread because it is my favorite book that I read that month, and that is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. This was part of a read-along that I did with Steph, Jane, and Sasha, and I think I loved it most out of all of them. No surprise there. I told them to read this, so it's fine. This one follows 2 main characters. It follows Elias, who is part of the Empire. He's part of these soldiers called Masks, and he wants to run away from the life he's living. And we follow Laia, whose brother got kidnapped in this book, and she wants to get her brother back. So that is basically the premise of this book, and then sort of everything sort of intertwines, and they find each other, and there's magic, and there's a lot of things going on. And in general, I think An Ember in the Ashes is one of my absolute favorite series, and this was my favorite book for June. Did I say that June is bad? July was worse. It's a surprise I read 100 books last year. But for July, I have picked Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. This is basically a collection of short stories of the Norse gods. So we see stories about Thor, Loki, Odin, all these characters come across. Freya, I loved, and I snickered so many times when reading this book. It was absolutely hilarious, and I think it is something that kind of got me out of my reading slump. I really love this. Also, I love the edition I have. Like, the spine is literally pure gold. And what I find funny is that this paperback has one of these things. I've never seen that in paperbacks. It's my only paperback that has this. But this is definitely my favorite in the month of July. Not that I've read many books in July, but it was still my favorite. Now we are getting into the more difficult months, because for August I have read quite a bit. I was really in the reading mood, read quite a few, but I think the one book I can and will mention is Blade of Secrets by Tricia Levenseller. I think I've talked about this book multiple times, and I will not stop talking about it until the sequel is here, probably after that still. But this is about a girl who has severe social anxiety, and she, in a unfortunate series of events, has to run with her sister after she's forged a magical weapon that basically the person who asked for this weapon wants to use to destroy the world. And this was such an interesting story, and I loved the fact that our main protagonist wasn't your regular fantasy character that will stand up for everything and is always brave and is always courageous and is always able and well-bodied with everything. Our main protagonist here was just really struggling, and I'm not saying that I love seeing people struggle, but it was very enlightening and refreshing to see a character that wasn't your regular dime a dozen fantasy character. The story in general, really well done, and I love the way that Tricia Levenseller just writes. I love her writing. I don't think I've disliked any of her books. Some of them, or most of them, are on my all-time favorites list, and this is no exception. September, also not a surprise, Kingdom of the Wicked. September was definitely a difficult month to pick from, because September was a month where I read a lot, but this really, it became one of my all-time favorites, and so it is only fair that I put this in the September spot. Quite honestly, I am not putting the sequel on here because I read that in October, but I have a different book for October, but it is definitely one of my all-time favorites, so I'll just lump these together and say this one and, you know, book 2. This is basically about a twin. Amelia and Amelia's twin sister Vittoria gets murdered, and in an unfortunate series of events she summons one of the wicked, and they are part of the 7 deadly sins, and she summons wrath. And being from a long line of witches, it is not a surprise that she summons something, but the fact that she summoned one of the wicked is definitely not a good sign. I loved her though. She's one of those she's one of those characters that really stands for what she believes in, and I loved seeing her shift between before her sister was murdered and after, because I feel like that grief in fantasy stories tends to be overlooked quite a bit, and it is really clear that Amelia is suffering from the loss of her twin sister, and she becomes a different person, especially like a very frightened, well, not necessarily frightened, very angry, very sad, and I appreciate seeing that done in fantasy a lot more, because I think that loss is something incredibly painful for all of us, and for me personally, I've lost quite a bit in my short lifespan, and I feel like it tends to be overlooked in fantasy, so I really appreciated seeing that come to life in this one. Speaking of loss, October was the month where I read, I think, besides November, the most books this year. I think it's about 12 or 13, so it's kind of difficult to pick from because of the fact that I've read so much. At the end of September I lost Nina, and in October I really needed escapism, so I read whatever whenever I could. Whenever I had a moment to spare and I was sitting inside of my own thoughts, I would pick up a book, and I would prefer fantasy considering it transforms you, or it sort of actually gets you out of the real world. And so it was kind of difficult to, I don't know, to actually sort of get into which was my favorite. Like I said, I also read the sequel to Kingdom of the Wicked, which is Kingdom of the Cursed, which was definitely amazing. But the book I eventually went for is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This is about, I think I've mentioned this multiple times already, but this is about a world in which you have multiple Londons that are set next to each other. So you have black, red, white, and grey London, and our main protagonist Kel is able to move between them, and in the story he also meets Lila, who's from grey London, who is badass onto herself. She's an amazing character. And a piece of Black London which has been destroyed. Black London has been destroyed. A piece of magic from this Black London finds its way to Red London, and Kel has to dispose of it, basically, which is very, very dangerous. And that's sort of the premise of the story. I don't want to say too much because I will let you be surprised. And this is the first book in this trilogy. I will continue on with the series. I absolutely loved it, hence why it's on this list. And I think that if you haven't read this yet, I think you should definitely give it a try. I didn't expect to love it as much, considering it is a bit of urban fantasy, and I'm not an urban fantasy reader, but I loved it. 2 more months left. November, similarly to October, was difficult because I read a ton. November was definitely a reading month, and November was also the month that I read, here we go, contemporary romance. I went into a contemporary romance binge from November up until this point. I'm still binging, though I have read some fantasy in between. But I'm absolutely obsessed, and the book that I fell head over heels with is none other than the very hyped The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. Quite honestly, I didn't know it was hyped. I just saw it on Goodreads and thought, oh, this looks interesting. I am very out of tune with what is hyped and what is not when it comes to contemporary, and so I didn't know. But apparently it's very hyped. I didn't know that. And this follows a girl who has to go to her sister's wedding, and she's getting married to her brother's, to the brother of her ex. So that's a painful situation, and so she really wants a date. And her co-worker Erin then actually says, you know what, I will go with you, even though they hate each other. So it's a fake dating, enemies to romance. There's a 1 bedroom, 1 bed trope. I love this book. I can't say too much about it because I think you should just be surprised and just soak it all in, because it deserves all the hype it gets. It honestly does. I can't wait to see what this writer does next. I'm obsessed with Erin. I am obsessed with this entire book, and I really want to reread it. But I have different books a year to read. But that is definitely by far a favorite, and I'm putting this down for November. That takes us to the final month. The month of December. December was a bit of a strange month because I've read multiple things and I've read them sort of wishy-washy everywhere. I had a couple of books, well, 1 book that I really had to read, and then there was the books I wanted to read, which, in any case, the one I'm going to put on this list is another hyped book, and that is The Love Hypothesis. I feel like this book has been talked about by everyone, and after I started sort of this contemporary romance binge, I saw this book pop up, and at first I thought it's one of those high school settings, and I didn't expect to enjoy it. So I think I asked on Twitter if someone could recommend it or something along those lines, and Kelly responded and she was like, you know what, we'll buddy read it. We can buddy read this. And so we attempted, because she had already read it, I think 2 weeks prior to us starting this buddy read. And when I started reading the book, I was working quite a bit, but I literally remember texting her like, hey, do you mind if I just continue on, because I can't wait, I need to read more. And I think I finished it in 2 days, but that was only because I had to work, otherwise I would have finished it in 1 sitting. Absolutely obsessed with it. Our main protagonist, Olive, she is actually working towards her PhD, and she used to date this guy that her best friend has a crush on, and because of the best friend code, her best friend says, you know what, I'm not going to date him because you were with him. And so to make a point to her best friend that she's no longer into this guy so that her best friend can date him, she kisses the first person she sees to sort of reiterate that, and that is Dr. Adam Carlson. They then enter this fake dating relationship, and from there on the story progresses to make sure that her best friend actually starts dating this guy, and you know, she's happy. And then once that happens, Olive will be like, you know what, we broke up, whatever. This book was absolutely brilliant. I loved every minute of it, just as hyped as The Love Hypothesis, maybe even, no, as The Spanish Love Deception, maybe even more so, but it deserves every hype, it deserves everything it gets, and I loved it. So definitely a favorite, so I'm putting that down for December. Those were all 12 of the books I wanted to mention. It was very difficult to pick books certain months, other months very, very clear. And I thought it would be nice to do a bit of a different thing, because some of these books definitely didn't make it onto my favorites list of the year, but were the favorite of that month. And I loved seeing the difference in sort of stars that I gave, because there were certain months where I was like, woo, and then other months where I was like, woo, and it was just really fun to see how many amazing books and not so amazing books I've read in that year, especially considering I read I think 106, something along those lines. So I'm really, really proud of that. And yeah, that is everything I wanted to talk about today. I hope you have had an amazing New Year's, because happy 2022, and I hope that you are all good. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and press that little bell icon so you get post notifications every single time that we post. And I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye!